Are we all here?
Yes.
Welcome to Maine Preservation's 52nd annual meeting. My name is Cale Pickford, and I'm the president of the Board of Trustees of Maine Preservation. Thank you for joining us virtually this afternoon. I'd also like to thank our preservation champions and major donors who generously contributed $5,000 or more in the last year. Gregory Boulos, James Brady, Susan and Josh Burns, Christopher and Rosalie Glass, Linda Hanscom, Judith Martin, Mary and George McNeil, Dee Dee Stockley, Michelle and Aaron Sturgis, Anna Marie and John E. Thron, Severin von Scharner, Fleming, Amy Woodhouse, and Toby Scott. You've taken Maine Preservation to a new level, and we thank you very much. These very generous patrons provide a strong underpinning for all of our activities and our events. I also want to extend my appreciation to our sponsors, starting with the generosity of Norway Savings Bank as presenting sponsor. We are also grateful for the support from Linda Bean's Maine Kitchen and Chinburg Properties, industry leaders. We are also deeply grateful for our underwriter, lead, and supporting sponsors who are also listed here. We have a fantastic program for you all today. First is our short annual business meeting. So I'd like to now officially call to order the 2023 annual business meeting of Maine Preservation. This meeting is for the members of Maine Preservation. If you are not a member of Maine Preservation, please refrain from voting on the motions or elections of trustees. And we hope you will join soon. A link to the minutes from last year's meeting was sent to the pre-registrants and is included in the chat. I would now entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Can't see everybody. Assuming I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion, Betsy Henshaw, in the second. Thank you. We'll now put a poll on the screen. In favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. The ayes have it. The motion passes. I would now like to introduce our treasurer, Jim Brady, to give the treasurer's report.
Thank you so much, Cal.
You're welcome.
My name is Jim Brady. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see many of you on the screen. This is the report for our fiscal year ending 2022, which covered the period from April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023. On the revenue side, we ended the fiscal year with $24,538 surplus. Our total assets were $961,292, which includes restricted funds for easement management and other activities. Long-term investments are maintained at Maine Community Foundation. We had $885,291 in our two easement funds at the beginning of the fiscal year and ended the fiscal year with $778,625 in both of those easement funds. This represents a decrease of $106,665 over the course of the last fiscal year due to market conditions. The organization holds no debt obligations or mortgages. On the expense side, the organization successfully reduced expenses throughout the year to meet the budget. Nice job on the staff's part for that. This concludes the treasurer's report for the past fiscal year. Thank you very much for your attention. And I guess at this stage, I'd like to introduce the secretary, Betsy Henshaw, to give the nominating committee report.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Cale. And I too would like to welcome everyone to our annual meeting. I am pleased to begin the nominating report by placing a nomination for their initial 3-year term as a trustee of Maine Preservation. The following are the nominations: Anastasia Azanaro Moore of Elliott, Maine, Erica Kramer of Phippsburg, Eric Fiebert, hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly, of Portland, Robert Libby of Bangor, Decory McIntosh of Portland, and Willie Wong of Walterboro. I place their names on behalf of the nominating committee, which as a committee motion does not require a second, and move the question.
All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Please respond on the poll on the screen. The ayes have it. Thank you and welcome with a great slate of advisory trustees.
Yes, very excited to have you all on board. Next, I'd like to place a nomination for their initial one-year term as an advisory trustee of Maine Preservation, and that is Shaw Sprague of Cape Elizabeth.
All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Please respond to the poll on your screen. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Yay.
Thank you, Shaw.
Yay. And then finally, I would now like to place in nomination the current advisory trustees as printed on the program, which you have in front of you. I will not read their names. The nominating committee places the group as printed in the program in nomination, and I move the question.
Again, all those in favor, vote aye. All opposed, nay. Please respond to the poll on your screen. The ayes have it. Thank you. And thank you, Betsy, for that report of the nominating committee. My heartfelt welcome to our new trustees and advisory trustee. I now entertain a motion to adjourn to the 2023 annual meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Yes, I'll second.
Now I'm going to put a poll on the screen. All those in favor, vote aye. All opposed, vote nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Well done.
Adjourned. I'll now hand the reins to our Executive Director, Tara Kelly, to give us an update on the priority initiatives in preservation.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thanks to Cale, Jim, and Betsy for conducting the annual business meeting. Welcome to our new trustees and advisory trustees and our returning trustees and advisory trustees. So I'm Tara Kelly. I'm Executive Director of Maine Preservation. And as most of you know, we are a statewide historic preservation organization. We promote and preserve Maine's historic fabric, which in turn stimulates the cultural and economic vitality across the state. We have 5 key areas of work, and today I'd like to highlight some updates on each from the past year. I'll start with technical assistance that we provide to homeowners, nonprofit organizations, businesses, local governments, you name it. We recently spent 2 days on North Haven as part of our residency program. Our visit included conversations with year-round residents and stops at Union Hall, the Pulpit Harbor Church, Calderwood Hall, Brown's Boatyard, Hopkins Wharf Gallery, American Legion Post 33, and a few homes stretching back to the late 18th century. From July 10th to July 14th, we're headed to Aroostook County for a full week on the ground. Some projects require more in-depth consultation, fundraising assistance, and capacity building. First Congregational Church of East Machias on the left and Wayne Masonic Hall on the right were both listed on our 2021 Most Endangered Historic Places in Maine list. However, this winter, we were awarded $3 million in community project funding from Representative Golden, bringing desperately needed dollars for the rehabilitation and reuse of these important community resources under our expert guidance. We also offer grant support to get projects started out on their own. Over the last 3 years, we've administered nearly $500,000 in preservation grants to 73 projects throughout the state, made possible through funding from the 1772 Foundation. This year, we've provided $128,952 to 17 projects listed here. The grants range in amount from $2,500 to a maximum of $10,000. We also hold preservation easements on 44 buildings across the state. Each year, we visit all our easement properties to monitor conditions. In addition, we review proposals for alteration, such as the substantial rehabilitation currently taking place at the Robbins Anderson Homestead in South Thomaston, or the transformation of the 1824 herb house into a living classroom, construction of a visitor center, and the rehabilitation of the 1830 ox barn at Sabbath Day Lake Shaker Village. In addition, we seek to provide professionals with information on best practices and emerging technologies, while also empowering everyday Mainers to engage in preservation and rehabilitation efforts within their own communities. Last year, we launched the first Jane's Walk Me Festival statewide, named after community activist Jane Jacobs. The Festival of Walking Conversations is intended to increase engagement and connection with place. This year, we held Jane's Walks in there were 39 walks in 26 communities and towns across the state: Auburn, Bangor, Bath, Belgrade, Biddeford, Cassine, Chesapeake, Eastport, Ellsworth, Farmington, Gardner, Greenville, Hallowell, Hinckley, Holton, Lisbon, Livermore, Monmouth, Parsonsfield, Portland, Stonington, Van Buren, Wells, and Westbrook. We're still counting heads, but we estimate that more than 500 people participated in walks across the state. Our Summer Fellows program is another educational opportunity where we provide unique hands-on experience for students in historic preservation in partnership with Bagala Window Works, Heritage Coppersmiths, and Preservation Timber Framing. We'll be joined by 3 fellows this year starting next week, and they are coming to us from University of Vermont in Burlington, Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island, and Clemson University in Charleston, South Carolina. Despite the success of this program, however, we recognize the critical need for trade professionals and have worked with our statewide partners to both quantify and address the problem. In March, we released a study, The Understanding and Advancing the Historic Trades, which has since opened doors in educational and workforce development communities. We have several outstanding grant applications to fund our efforts to bolster the trades, including another earmark request, which has been shortlisted by Senator King. We have also recently received funds from the Davis Family Foundation to develop a curriculum for children's education, which will include an introduction to careers in historic trades. And last but not least, we are a voice for Maine in our government and in the media. We advocate on a state and national level for sound preservation policy to support rehabilitation of Maine's historic resources. For the past year, we have been working ardently to build off the success of the existing historic rehabilitation tax credit to improve the small credit and provide a program for historic homeowners, as recommended in the 2021 OPEGA report. I'd like to now take a few minutes to introduce this proposal to you. First, we are improving the small credit, as I mentioned, which has only been sparingly used since it was initiated 14 years ago. This is targeted towards income-producing properties and will have a tremendous impact on our business centers and downtown. We also seek to provide a similar financial incentive for historic homeowners. This 25% credit has a minimum expense of $5,000 and a maximum of $250,000. An additional 5% is available to property owners at or below 120% of AMI, for properties that have an affordable rental unit at 100% of AMI or less, and finally, vacant properties that come online and will serve as a primary residence. Resident taxpayers of Maine who do own or will own eligible properties that will be their primary residence qualify for this credit. The credit is available not just to the owner-occupied structure, but barns, studios, workspaces, home offices, and other outbuildings on the property that contribute to its significance. As previously mentioned, buildings that have been vacant for more than 5 years are also able to access this credit. And it also includes multifamily dwellings with 4 or more units, as long as the taxpayer also resides there. For the most part, properties need to be determined to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. That means that they are more than 50 years old, associated with a historic event or person, and demonstrate a considerable amount of integrity. The Maine Historic Preservation Commission will determine this eligibility, whether for individual sites or as part of a larger district. It's important to note what expenses qualify, specifically that this is for exterior work, and that includes ADA upgrades, structural repairs, resiliency upgrades, and energy efficiency improvements. Conversely, interior work does not qualify, nor does new construction, landscaping, remediation, or work on non-contributing additions. We had a hearing at the Committee on Taxation on May 9th, and we are waiting for the work session to be scheduled, which might be happening as soon as next week. If it is passed out of committee, it will go to both chambers of the legislature, and then appropriations table, and we'll discuss the fiscal impact, and then finally to the governor's desk. We hope that you will support us along this journey to getting this legislation passed. And so that, in rapid fire with a lot of tongue twisting, is what we've been up to. We're here to help you. And we are here also to present some speakers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to them. If I can stop my screen share, I will introduce them. Great. All right. It is now my pleasure to welcome Catherine Sear, who completed her master's thesis in 2022 on architecture and histories of early Maine sporting and leisure camps. Compiling information from fieldwork visits, history photographs, and camp ephemera, her work has identified unique architectural elements of Maine camps and advocated for continued preservation efforts. So Catherine, let's turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, bear with me as we do the dreaded screen share. And did I do this right again? Hold 1 second. We'll get there. Can everybody see that now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh no, we had this right the last time. I apologize, everybody. We had this going. Okay, why won't you let me do this? There. Is it showing it now?
Yes.
Okay. Hey,
You're in presenter mode. But
I'm still in presenter mode. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. How did we fix this last time?
I'm not sure. I think you just didn't press play. I think maybe you just went to
Hold
full
on.
screen.
There. Oh,
Yay.
we're good now.
Good.
Okay. Well, thank you all for bearing with me. It's been a long time since I've had to do Zoom presentations after a whole, 2 years of grad school completely on Zoom. But thank you again as we deal with technical difficulties, and good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and to Maine Preservation for this opportunity. With the official start of summer now in our rear view mirrors, it feels like the perfect time to head up to camp, albeit virtually, and explore the framework and history behind the iconic buildings that dot Maine's woods and waterways. Tonight, we will take a brief look into the research I completed in graduate school in 2021 and 2022 through the Winchester Program in American Material Culture at the University of Delaware. This research was some of the first scholarship to define the vernacular architecture of late 19th and early 20th century Maine camps, and to investigate the elements that contribute to the form's evolution over time. My research divided the history of Maine camps into 3 periods: first period sporting camps, second period sporting camps, and private family camps. I outlined the form and function of each type and explored how each evolved to model the needs of their clientele, incorporating aspects of their environment to draw individuals to the Maine woods and create a uniquely Maine experience. As I'm sure many of you know, the word camp can have many meanings, especially depending on who you ask and where you ask. And if we were to do one of those fancy polls on Zoom again and ask everybody in the audience what their definition of camp is, we'd probably have numerous definitions for just what camp means in Maine. But for this research and this project, I used the following definition: that a camp is a permanent, seasonally occupied building or set of buildings located in the interior portion of the state, most often in a heavily wooded area next to or overlooking a body of water. And furthermore, I identified 2 distinct types of Maine camps in my research. This included the sporting camp and the private family camp or leisure camp. And so sporting camps, as many of you know, are businesses consisting of a central lodge and a group of sleeping cabins, which the general public can rent seasonally. And then private family camps, as the name would suggest, are private buildings owned by families, often passing through multiple generations of ownership and used primarily as vacation homes during the summer months. But notably, there is no single formula or building plan for a Maine camp. Camps from the late 19th and early 20th centuries inherently vary from location to location, but they are connected through a series of common elements that I have identified and labeled as the basis of the Maine camp form. These elements include the use of locally available raw materials, often harvested directly on the building site, the fact that the buildings are designed and built by owners and local laborers, and specifically not architects or typically somebody with professional training, the strategic use of the natural terrain and surrounding landscape of the Maine woods, creating a setting that embodies the location literally and figuratively, the use of log or wood frame construction, the lack of a slab or masonry foundation, the all-important front porch, the deliberate use and placement of windows for air circulation and water views, and unfinished and uninsulated interiors. However, through multiple attempts of modernization of camps over the years, many camps now have finished interiors. But the development of Maine camps was by no means accidental. Their rise and subsequent popularity were directly related to the burgeoning cultural movements that resulted in significant changes in American society. The post-Civil War era saw Americans adjusting their relationships with leisure and tourism, class and wealth, and technology and nature as the world quickly transformed before their eyes. People began flocking to the Maine woods thanks to the expansion of rail systems and the popularity of the Back to Nature movement, which encouraged individuals to remove themselves from industrial environments and embrace the beauty and bounty of rural settings. As the Adirondacks region in New York, a popular vacationing and sporting destination, quickly became overcrowded, and its woods and streams, quote unquote, less wild and undisturbed, individuals and especially sportsmen searched for new hunting and fishing grounds, ultimately finding Maine's many lakes and rivers and hundreds of miles of forest particularly suitable. Numerous guidebooks and newspaper articles were written about the Maine woods and the experience awaiting guests at the newly conceived sporting camps. These newly conceived camps, or first period sporting camps, began populating the Maine woods as early as the 1840s, but were most dominant between 1870 and 1920. These sites advertised extensively to sportsmen who were promised restorative vacations and the opportunity to explore pristine hunting and fishing grounds. The camps looked to fully immerse their visitors in the Maine woods and embrace many aspects of outdoor living while still catering to the sensibilities of their city-dwelling middle-class clientele. And thus the defining characteristics of first period sporting camps include, once again, that all-important centralized lodge, which hosted the camp's main amenities, including the kitchen, the dining room, the recreation, and leisure spaces, all with a touch of sophistication that folks would be accustomed to. And then the sleeping cabins that surrounded that central lodge were built extremely close to the shoreline, allowing folks to literally feel as if they were on top of the water or practically in it. They'd also be typically around heavily wooded surroundings, so that they felt as if they were once again in the Maine woods. The sleeping cabins were also built very close to one another, which meant there was limited space in between and limited privacy. They were predominantly log construction, with the exteriors often painted brown with an accent trim color. They often had front gable roofs oriented towards the shoreline, which allowed space to place a front porch. And they had relatively small interiors consisting of 1 or 2 bedrooms and potentially sort of a living or kind of recreation space. And so the photos that you see here on the screen and the following couple of slides are all photos that were taken by myself and my wonderful research buddy, my fiance, of our fieldwork visits up to the Rangeley and Moosehead Lake regions, where the most extant number of camps really remain to this day. And so second period sporting camps were an adaptation of their predecessors, the first period sporting camps. These new camps became more family friendly and consistent with popular result culture while continuing to attract sportsmen. These changes coincided with the rise of family vacations and the use of the automobile. Most importantly, second period camps were far more willing to introduce modern amenities into their buildings to persuade guests to spend their summers in Maine. And so the defining characteristics of this bunch of camps include generous cleared lawn space in and around the sleeping cabins, which increased privacy for the families that were in there, but also in many cases offered a space to park the vehicle directly next to the building. There's a diverse array of sleeping cabin styles at each camp, one for any sort of feeling or type of group that might come in, as you can see with the photos on your screen. There's a mix of construction. Some are log, some are wood frame. There's also a mix of 1 and 2 story camps that include multiple bedrooms, a living rooms, and eventually, really by the 30s, bathrooms with running hot water, all amenities necessary for comfortably housing a family, especially those with children. And then there's also an important kind of landscape aspect to the second period sporting camps that includes access to communal docks, swimming beaches, tennis courts, etc., that are available for recreational time. And finally, with private camps, they were built by individuals and families who desired to have vacation homes in Maine or a vacationing experience in Maine, but were uninterested in fully participating in the sporting camp culture, which was ultimately still pretty public, being around lots of different folks that are coming in and out during the summertime. They reflect each owner's design preferences and needs, resulting in camps that exhibit a wide variety of styles across the state. However, because these camps were no longer part of a larger complex, they did have to consolidate all of the functions of the earlier sporting camps into a singular building and under one roof. And so the characteristics of this, again, pretty large and wide-ranging group of buildings include predominantly wood frame construction. There's a far more diverse array of exterior color schemes. They tend to have larger front porches, often extending around the front elevation. They're just inevitably larger buildings, again, 1 and 2 story buildings, because you now have to include multiple bedrooms, a dining area, kitchen, and a bathroom. And they were built and owned by both Maine residents, some who lived and worked maybe just a couple of towns over, but also those that traveled great distances by rail and steamship and so on to get to these remote places. And so as much as Maine camps, like the ones in all of the previous slides, are a staple for so many of our summer experiences, including my own, their futures are in jeopardy. Many of you likely remember that just 4 years ago, Maine Preservation highlighted their perilous position by including them on its annual list of most endangered historic places. The reasoning behind this warning is due to a lengthy list of ongoing threats. Many sporting and private family camps have been significantly renovated or simply razed over the years. The dramatic increase in land and real estate values and the desire to modernize the century-old camps to conform to contemporary design trends and lifestyle habits has severely threatened the survival of these extant historic resources and their architectural integrity. Sporting camps in particular face growing business challenges that make operating camps financially demanding, from rising taxes to operation costs to finding and keeping staff while competing with popular rental programs such as Airbnb and Vrbo. And therefore, there is a dire need to increase awareness and preservation efforts surrounding Maine camps and to teach the public about their significance and role in Maine history. My hope is that this research, along with the great work that Maine Preservation is already doing, can continue to build upon this process and encourage others to take up the preservation mantle. And so thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. It's fascinating. I'm so glad that that you've done this research. And just as a point of order, everyone, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and so we can ask Catherine and Michelle and Tim any questions at that point. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Michelle Hauser, who will discuss her photographic project, Meeting Hall, Maine, which records for posterity the documentation of hundreds of meeting halls found throughout the state. This civic architecture, built primarily by volunteer societies, represents the collective power of local people banding together into groups to achieve shared interests. This project aims to instill a desire in others to preserve Maine's historic network of halls as democratic forums for generations to come. So thanks for being here, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara and Maine Preservation, for offering me this opportunity to present my work, and special thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us tonight. Have any of you ever fallen in love with a building? I have. Since I'm asking a group of historic preservationists, I imagine the answer to that question is yes. I personally fell in love with a former meeting hall in Kennebec County, which began the trajectory leading to the photographic project I'm presenting here, entitled Meeting Hall, Maine. The photographs record for posterity the documentation of hundreds of meeting halls found throughout the state. I will show a selection of images from this ongoing project as I tell the story of how this idea came about. So the images being shown from the project are not going to illustrate this narrative exactly. I will first offer insight into my artistic intent. The vision for the project is to adhere to centered compositions of frontal, side, and back views, allowing the halls to stand out from their context without being isolated from it. Capturing the halls in this way aims to eliminate romanticizing them and emphasizes the documentary tone of each image. At some sites, three-quarter landscape views were taken of the hall, which sets the structures in their context and their relationship to other buildings in the environment. The typologies act as portraits, while the three-quarter perspectives evoke the experience of a particular place. The project also includes work that appropriates signifiers used in ritual activities taking place inside the meeting halls. I wanted to explore the ability symbols have to reveal, communicate, and at the same time remain ambiguous. Together, these three formats offer geographic location, historical and economic origins, present-day condition and use, and symbolism, all of which embody a visual narrative reflecting loss, adaptation, mystery, and resilience. Back in 1981, I forged a lasting tie to Maine at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. I was earning my BFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago at the time. Maine's vernacular architecture resonated with me as we drove around and went to visit places like South Solon Meeting Hall, which is filled with frescoes from Skowhegan alumni. That first summer in Maine, I also went out to Monhegan Island. These experiences were exhilarating. So 8 years later, while living in New York City, I jumped at the chance to join my friend to return to Maine to paint in a former Oddfellows Hall in Mount Vernon Village. When I saw the building, it was love at first sight. The hall was a 3-story, beautifully proportioned building with a flat roof that was perched on a sloping incline going down to Lake Minnehaha. It was a magical space to be in, and each floor was approximately 3,000 square feet. The original Minnehaha Lodge burnt to the ground. The hall I came to know was built in and around 1920 and is pictured on this business card. I wanted to remind you that as I tell this story, I will continue to show selections from Meeting Hall, Maine that do not illustrate the story I'm telling about how this project germinated into what it is today. So back to the Oddfellows Hall I fell in love with. The ceiling on the main floor was at least 30 feet high that offered an expansive auditorium unencumbered by columns. It had a stage that was framed by 2 bas-relief Corinthian columns and a row of footlights. For years, the town's annual Christmas revels were performed there. Films were shown and a myriad of other events took place even after the Oddfellows disbanded and it fell into private hands. The floor below the auditorium had a full kitchen with a 12-burner Garland stove to hold public suppers. This floor had been converted into a living space, and the top floor, where the Oddfellows formerly held their meetings and rituals, was my painting studio. Because the building stood about 10 feet from the shore of the lake, the views from the top story corner window felt like you were on the bow of a ship. The hall served as an inspiration. Having an expanse of time to spend painting in the hall brought me back up from New York City for a decade of summers and was the catalyst for winning a Pollock Krasner Foundation grant. This hall was also where I first met my late husband, Andrew Flam, after which I became a year-round resident of Maine in 1995. Since the 60s, halls had been going dark due to waning membership. The material culture from these lodges came into the antique marketplace and at auctions and flea markets. Andrew and I were especially drawn to these objects, and this became an area of expertise. We began buying and selling folk art and Americana full-time, naming our business Oddfellows Art and Antiques. One of our favorite Oddfellows symbols that I have appropriated here using historic photographic processes is their heart and hand staff, which teaches the initiate that whatever the hand goes to do, the heart must go with it. In our travels buying and selling antiques across Maine and at trade shows in Chicago, New York, Atlanta, and Nashville, we excitedly recognized the signs and symbols displayed on meeting halls across the country that formed a network of volunteer societies linking Maine to their brethren in other states. Seeing these widespread national movements sparked the idea for what is now the ongoing project, Meeting Hall, Maine. In our travels over the years, we also began to see the halls we admired going dark, falling into disrepair and being razed. We began to think seriously about documenting the buildings. We understood they were disappearing. This idea stayed on the back burner until 2018, after Andrew received a cancer diagnosis and sold his half of his then business, Main Street Meats, up in Rockport, Maine. Sadly, Andrew passed away at the end of that year. However, we were able to capture many wonderful images together, as shown here, and the fading Cooper's Mills Oddfellows Hall. The project came to fruition in the year 2020 as I began to post-process the digital negatives into black and white prints in preparation for my solo show at the Maine Jewish Museum, which opened in the spring of 2021. I sequenced many of the typologies into grids and pairings to invite comparison. Byrne and Hilla Becker, Walker Evans, Ed Ruche, William Christenberry, as well as vernacular holdings in the Walther collection were essential to informing this work. The concept behind Oldolf Gottlieb's photographic paintings, pictographic paintings, each occupant has a room of his own but are in harmony and function as a unified whole, is a guiding principle for composing my larger grids. This historic network of halls telegraphs our human need to create structures in order to unite people together. Built primarily by volunteer societies, these halls represent the collective power of local people banding together into groups to achieve shared interests such as legislative goals, forming cooperatives, engendering friendships, and supporting those in distress. These groups are active in Maine today, albeit in waning numbers. The structure of these organizations mirrors our own system of government. These groups create local, state, and national networks that give a strong voice to local grassroots causes, invigorating our democracy. A historic example of this happened when the National Grange's 20-year lobbying effort of Congress brought about rural free delivery in 1896. By 1913, this door-to-door service included parcel post delivery, transforming rural Maine in life into the modern era. Saving the United States Postal Service and bringing broadband to rural areas in Maine is the challenge of the 21st century. Although fraternal organizations have seen a sharp decline in their membership, this continued form of social interaction is especially important to rural communities across Maine. With the resurgence of a young, vibrant farmers movement in Maine, renewed interest is happening in places like Blue Hills, Halcyon Grange. Many halls are also being revitalized as new groups form and adopt halls to serve new interests, such as the Greenhorns up in Pembroke, who have transformed former Oddfellows Hall into an agrarian library to foster organic farming practices. Being the first beneficiary society in the United States, the credo of the Oddfellows is visit the sick, relieve the distressed, bury the dead, educate the orphan, and house the widow. This bonded their membership around the grave concerns of their day. Healthcare and being able to provide for one's family in times of illness and death continues to be one of the pressing issues of our time. So what I find most compelling is that many of the issues that we are grappling with today are the same struggles that these groups collectively tackled to overcome. This model for uniting people resonates in this moment with a particular force as we look for safe, nonpartisan, and secular environments to nurture common ground. Meeting Hall, Maine aims to preserve an appreciation and a desire in others to preserve these vernacular structures as democratic forums for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. What a wonderful reminder about how preservation is really about people. And I look forward to, continuing to work with you and with the Greenhorns on kind of delving into the opportunities presented by rehabilitating these buildings.
Great.
So now I'd like to head over to our last speaker, who is Tim O'Brien, who is going to present a selection from his book, The Maine Roadshow, a roadside tour of the state's history, culture, food, funk, and oddities. This 5-year project covered more than 7,000 miles in which he traveled to all corners of the state, visiting each of 400 plus locations that he personally photographed in the 450 photos taken featured in the book. So with that, hand it over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Tara. Trying to figure out make sure I'm
You got
sharing
it.
this. We got it?
Yeah, just click that little icon where you had your cursor a second ago, and I think we're ready to go.
I can see it.
Okay.
You
There we go.
play
Thank you.
Yay.
I'm all set. Great. Thanks, Tara. This is a great opportunity for me to show off my work of love as a summer resident of Maine. For 5 years, every Wednesday and Thursday, my wife and I would take off and do a road trip to a certain corner of the state. And we visited over 700 locations in those 5 years, and I had to narrow it down to like 400 for this book, and took all the photos and enjoyed writing about it once I got back. It was more a journal, I think, probably a travel journal than it is actually a guidebook. But and the subtitle is a roadside tour of the state's history, culture, food, funk, and oddities. And boy, Maine has a lot of all that. So shall we start here? Welcome home. You know, the Green Bridge brings back a lot of smiles and tears of everybody that crosses it, and a lot of unexplainable emotion. My wife, who is Maine born, every time she crosses that bridge, you feel a little melancholy coming from that corner of the car. And she calls it a portal to life, as it should be. And what I've learned about Maine, I can't argue with that at all. Okay, how many of you know what a goldenrod kiss is? Well, if you know all about the Goldenrod Candy Shop in York Beach, it's been around since 1896. And an amazing thing about this little building is that 8 million pieces of taffy, and I got to add that that's 50 tons, they figured out, are made every year. So they're quite busy in that little area of York Beach. To get an adult beverage here at Lincoln's Speakeasy in Portland, you have to first walk down an unmarked narrow stairway, stop, open the door to your left, and then enter a small atrium. There, you need to figure out how to open the door into the bar area. And I have to admit that took me quite a while. But the bar's namesake, Abraham Lincoln, appears on the $5 bill. So all the drinks in the facility are $5. All the food is $5, and they don't unlock the door until 5 p.m. So everything costs to Lincoln here at Lincoln Speakeasy in Portland. This is one of the most amazing memorials I saw in my travels on Maine. In Bug Light Park in South Portland, this monument is to the 30,000 men and women who built more than 250 Liberty ships on this site in the early 1940s. Signage tells the story of Liberty ships, as well as the other ships built in this bustling shipyard. The Maine Mineral and Gem Museum in Bethel has more lunar rocks and Martian meteorites than any other collection in the entire world. And that includes the 5 largest chunks of the moon that are found on Earth, and also a 32-pound Martian rock on display, which is the oldest Martian rock known to man. It's here on Earth. It's New York quality. It's a beautiful, beautiful facility in Bethel. Oh, Paul Bunyan. Who can do anything on Maine without bringing up Paul Bunyan? Paul and Blue visited a region now known as the River Valley over in the Rumford area. But before settling down in any one area, they wanted to see what the area was all about. So they visited each of the 10 towns in the valley, where Paul built a special chair in which to rest as they looked. And these 10 chairs are part of the trail of chairs that today makes a lot of fun trying to find these little towns, everything from Andover to Byron to Peru to Dixfield, Mexico, Rumford. And they make great photo ops, and they also make great gathering places for local town meetings. And by the way, if you think Paul Bunyan, and if you believe about Paul Bunyan but not being born in Maine, well, that's a bunch of bunk. He is ours, and there is a birth certificate to prove it. It's on display in the Bangor City Hall and shows that he was actually born in Bangor on February 12th, 1834. And legend has it that it took 5 storks to deliver the very large infant to his parents. From a lumberjack that's huge to a giant troll, we now head over to the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens in Booth Bay. There's 5 giants on display, and this is just one of them. You can see how large that thing is compared to the little girl sitting in front of it. They were all built on site in the wooded areas, and they're meant to wither away over the years, to crumble in place, which shows the value of restorative nature. this is only, I think, the third season for them coming up. So they've still got a couple good years before they'll just start disintegrating, and they'll stay there until they do fall apart. Well, that's not the Great Maine Aqueduct crossing the Duck Trap River just north of Lincolnville you're looking at, although it does look like an aqueduct. It's actually two bridges, one built on top of the other. The original 1919 bridge, which you see at the very bottom, served as a base for the second bridge that was mandated by the state in 1932. To see, people drive over that every day and they don't see it because they're on top of it. I took this during a driving rainstorm from a local beach, which was quite a fun thing in itself. A 1-ton exact replica of the Liberty Bell now resides on the north lawn of the Capitol building in Augusta. It's one of 55 replicas made in the early 1950s to help promote the sales of independence bonds, and each state received one. Ours, which is marked number 40, was installed on July 7, 1950. And there is a clanger in it, but I found after crawling under there, it doesn't really clang. So the Wing Ring Cemetery in Wayne was created in a concentric circle around an obelisk with the gravestones placed on granite footings curved around that obelisk. The cemetery was built by the Wing brothers in 1867 and was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1991. Quite a unique thing in this beautiful little pondside village of Wayne. Balance Rock is in Bar Harbor. It's a glacial erratic, meaning that it's a piece of rock that differs from the size and type of rock native to that particular area. It was left behind at the end of the last ice age as a glacier receded. Geologists speculate that its origin is 40 miles northwest of here in the Lucerne area, just south of Bangor. The West Quoddy Lighthouse is built on the easternmost tip of the United States in Lubbock. And believe it or not, it's the closest place in the United States to Africa. I know I had to check mileage when I heard that fact too. But yep, it's right here at the lighthouse. You're exactly 3,154 miles from El Beduzo, Morocco. Who would have thought it? The Abenaki legend that this statue is a tribute to is a beautiful tale about a young moose who saves a woodsman from drowning. Then the moose flies off into the sunset upon golden wings. And this statue is on a private residence in Rockwood, and no signs or anything about it. This just one particular person's love for the tale. A 300-year-old ash tree died in Tabitha and Stephen King's front yard in Bangor. And with Tabitha's inspiration, it became a beautiful sculpture featuring books and animals that includes owls, birds, cats, frogs. And of course, if you look at the very top, it's topped with the notorious blackbirds that you find in a lot of Stephen King's novels. So that's quite, if you look at it, it's an amazing piece. It's all chainsaw art from an old ash tree trunk. You know, the funk in my title of my book is probably my favorite portion of it. But I found funky mailboxes throughout the state. I pulled over many times in the gravel and scared a lot of people when I see a mailbox. But in the county, at the very top of the county, you know, it snows about 100 inches of snow a year. And ingenious homeowners have found various ways to protect their mailboxes from the snow plows. They just take an old piece of lawnmower, mount a mailbox on top, and when it snows a lot and they hear the snow plows coming, they just wheel it back and it's safe. And then they move it right back out to get their mail the following day. I close my presentation today with a tale about an epic ferry ride that I took. As the ferry approached Vinyl Haven in a quiet, heavy fog. It wound its way through an archipelago of a dozen or more, large and small, barren forested islands. It was chilly. I was alone out on the deck of on the ferry boat. Seagulls and foghorns could be heard in the far distance. And as we pulled into the archipelago, the ferry cut its engines and you could hardly hear the putt-putt of the motor, and all these other sounds, the fog, the mist, it all really recorded into my soul. And that ride did make me a believer more than anything else I did in Maine so far in my life. I then understood, after looking at all this stuff and experiencing this, what the beauty and vastness of Maine can really do to your soul. And I know now why Mainers think the world of their home state. In any case, that's it. Thanks for watching. I guess, do I get more time since you're not there, Tara? No.
I'm here. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I do want to, Tim's book is for sale. I have my copy here. Tim went through, some of his favorite spots, but there's obviously hundreds and hundreds more. So follow the link and buy a book. I think that there will be some old favorites that you'll recognize and also some new ones. And I personally pay a lot of attention to mailboxes. So was really happy that he included those in there. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to all of you for any questions you might have for our speakers, that you might even have for me for my presentation about our tax credit proposal. We could harass and harangue our new trustees who are here with us. If you're a new trustee and you want to wave your hand or maybe put a little raised hand so we can see you. So happy to have you joining us. So any questions for our speakers or, I don't know, anybody else, because we're just a group of friends here.
We must have been thorough.
No, Tara, Toby here.
Yeah, go ahead, Toby.
Hey, Catherine, your camp tour just makes me want to go, jump in the car and run around all over the place. Which was your favorite of the camps you visited?
Oh, goodness. Oh, that is a great question. I think just because of the remoteness, I have to say was Spencer Pond camps,
Okay.
Which is about well over an hour northeast of Greenville. That is predominantly via logging roads. But what was really interesting about that camp is that the original sort of main structure was built as a private residence in 1901 by Moses Doody, and remained a private residence for a number of years until the 1960s when it became a sporting camp. And that was because technically the land underneath the camp is leased land. First, originally from a lumber industry and now through a private LLC. So there was actually some confrontation about whether or not they could run a business off of the land that they didn't own. But the owners that I got to speak with, and that was the case I had with all the camps that I visited, but he had just recently purchased the camps and was kind of trying to figure out its history, figuring out what he was going to do with it, where he was going to go. But there were just so many instances of just fantastic Yankee ingenuity at that property that I fell in love with from previous owners, including the use of treated telephone poles for logs that had rotted out at the base, like at the sill level for the building. So, hey, it's treated, it's not going to rot. They placed it in there, and ever so, slightly was able to see the numbers on it to note that it was actually, that was what it was. So,
are you saying they
really
stole
cool.
they stole the telephone poles?
They took the telephone poles. Hey, they're going to use the materials that they have, but just because it was so far out there, no cell service, nothing, and just beautiful, lake view of Little Spencer Pond and the mountain there. It was
Wow.
It was really heavenly.
Can I follow up with, and what was the most of the endangered of the camps that you saw that were and how can you help an endangered camp? could
Yeah,
be.
certainly. There's particularly one that comes to mind, and that was Maynard's in Maine. They're in Rockwood along the Moose River. They are in their third generation of ownership. And unfortunately, even when I, went in to ask, hey, I'm a grad student, can I look around at your camps? They said, oh, you want to look at those things that are falling down? And I said, yes, I do. They're important. And so I got the sense that the next generation isn't maybe as interested in continuing the ownership of the camp or the camp as a whole. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen with them. Hopefully it can stay within the family. But there certainly is just like some capital work to the actual sleeping cabins that need to happen in the near future.
Great. Thank you very much. Really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that whole thing too. I have to say, I love to fly fish, and one of my favorite fishing camps is the Libby camps up in Piscata's, how you pronounce county. And
Yeah.
Anyway, did you ever get to go up there?
Did not get to go up there. I wish I had had more time. This was all, fit into
Yeah.
a summer worth. I'm hoping to continue all of this research somehow in the near future. It is going to be the basis of a large scale exhibition at Maine Maritime Museum, sort of looking at camp culture as a whole, where I am the person who's in charge of the exhibit. So that's what I'm working on right now, is taking that research and putting that into something that's going to be really cool and immersive for folks. But Libby's camps are like probably at the top of my list of places I want to get back out to.
Well,
for
it's
field work.
really fun because you get up really early, have an amazing breakfast, and then you get on a little plane and fly into these places that are so remote. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, then that is the way to get predominantly to Libby camps, is via float plane. So not the most accessible, but super cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Betsy. Kale, go ahead.
Well, I just love how all three of your presentations involve, just exploring Maine and road trips, and, what better way to spend a day than just to take a place on the map and go there. So I just think we can all sort of really appreciate sort of the quality of the adventure in your passion projects. My question is for Michelle. I mean, you seem to be exposed to these meeting halls over a fairly broad span of time. How would you rate sort of their condition statewide? Are we doing well? I can think of a lot of sort of, individual examples of where people have sort of brought these buildings back and repurposed them and restored them, and then, getting some sort of, 21st century use. But I think, is that the general trend? And is there any places that we really need to keep our eye out? Because I think they're critically important to some of these historic communities and, represent a great part of our past.
There are places like Tuscan Masonic Lodge in Addison that are just absolutely loved and maintained and pristine. And then just around the corner is the Indian River Grange, which is no longer an active grange. A few years ago when I photographed it, it was an active grange, and now I went back and it's going dark. So its fate is sort of very precarious. It still has a straight roof, but you know how fast buildings can go downhill if they're not maintained, especially buildings that size. So I would say there's an incredible old Redmond Hiawatha Lodge in Oxford that looks like it had its heyday, and it doesn't look like it's being maintained at all. And it would be sad to lose it, but I think the whole spectrum as far as condition goes, if that was your question.
Yeah, no, I'm just assuming there's lots of work to be done, but it's such an important sort of cornerstone of traditional Maine lifestyle community. And I see there's some interest in bringing something like that back. So it's, definitely look forward to learning and exploring more about, what we can play in that space. So,
well, if we're not going to be joining fraternal organizations, we still need to come together. And these are beautifully sited, usually at, crossroads where a lot of people can get to them. One thing, I've just been all over the Blue Hill Peninsula, and they have just the most incredible array of meeting halls there. Some are, the rural hall. It's not part of a fraternal organization. There's the Surrey School, which acts as a community center. And somehow this area is able to support all these buildings. There's Central Hall, there's active Odd Fellows lodges. It's incredible what's on that peninsula. But I guess there's probably a little bit of money out there. And that always helps.
Appreciate the sense of place too, but yeah, those go hand in glove.
Right.
Anna.
Yeah. Hi there. Excellent presentation to all three of you. I just had a question for Michelle. Hi, Toby. So as sort of we are losing membership in these fraternal organizations, I know there are some of these facilities that are being repurposed for other uses. Is there a particularly interesting sort of adaptive reuse of these buildings that you found as you've traveled around the state?
I think what is happening in Pembroke with the Greenhorns, I don't know if you're familiar with the Greenhorns in Washington County. You are?
Yeah, yeah.
But I love that this former Odd Fellows Hall is now an agrarian library. I think that's really exciting. But I think any of the active lodges are still, it's really exciting that people are still, because they're learning how to be good citizens through this model. The fraternal organizations have presidents and secretaries, and the structure allows people, all different people, to come together and participate and learn how to participate in civic society. So they're teaching people actually how to be good citizens, which I think is exciting. So
yeah, that's pretty exciting.
Mr. Libby.
Hello, glad to be here. I had a question for Catherine about while your presentation was going on, I was just on Zillow, and I said, okay, what are the costs and values of some of these old camps? Did you do any study or address that at all in your thesis? And
just a little bit, not too much, as gotta rein in the research to
yeah, right, of course.
But certainly looked at sort of the factors about why camps, one, don't exist anymore or have fallen out of favor in areas, or are being replaced, and so on and so forth. And while I was writing this thesis, we were seeing the boom in COVID purchases and people escaping from the city to come up to Maine and have their piece of Maine and sort of escape from the big bustling areas. And so that was always in the back of my mind. And I'm lucky enough that I am marrying into a family that has a camp on Worthley Pond in Peru, and we have watched just the different camps over the last 4 or 5 years astronomically rise in price. These little tiny shacks that, when they were built, were probably built with offcuts of lumber from the lumber mills, predominantly by French Canadian families from the Rumford area, now being purchased for hundreds of thousands of dollars by somebody who is now going to maybe be there for a couple weekends of the year and not enjoy it in the same capacity as some very local families do and have over the years. So I think that there is still so much more work to be done. I've also seen instances of there are some summer camps or sporting camps that are beginning to be sold off as individual pieces. There's places up in the Rangeley Lakes where they essentially made it a condo association where people were able to buy plots of land and put their kind of gigantic mountain summer home, in a sense, for a couple, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars. And so I think that is a really crucial part, especially as the land underneath these structures are just so much more valuable than, in terms of money, than the structures themselves. Something that we have to just continue to be aware of and fight against in a way.
All right, last question, Mr. Hall.
I have so many questions. I'm going to save this one for Tim. Tim, as I travel around the state a lot, it's the greatest job in the world. Do you have any plans for a follow-up? I find that there's just this endless stream of very odd things in the state of Maine. And an adjunct question to that, speaking of odd things, I noticed a couple of years ago, if you look on Google Maps and you look at Limestone, Maine, there's laughing already.
I knew you were going to bring it up. I just knew it.
You'll see a place on there called the Exotic Code Training Institute. And I've yet to make it there. I don't know what it is. Have you been there?
The exotic what training?
Exotic Code Training Institute.
No, I just wrote it down. That's
Good.
That'll be my
Jonathan,
favorite in my new book.
Road trip.
Jonathan Toad, like hopping frog
Like a hopping
toad.
little frog toad, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Well, there's a lot of really fun little animal places, you know, like there's a sanctuary in Harmony, and it's a fiesta sanctuary. It's for parrots who are in retirement home. Like 40 some parrots in this lady's living room. Little things like that. But they actually promote it as an assisted living for retired parrots. So that kind of humor is just so whimsical and fun in Maine. It's but as far to get back to your first question, you know, I may, because there's so much stuff left that I couldn't put into this book that I had visited. So starting this summer, we're going to be rejoining a lot of these various groups across the state to learn more about the individuals who are the whimsy and wacky people. So I don't think I'll have any trouble finding a lot.
I don't think so either.
One thing Maine's not short of is whimsy and wacky.
Tim, quick question. Are you going to add food and stuff? I see you have these giant whoopie pies in back of you, but are you going to add in some whimsical food spots?
I don't know how whimsical it is, but I do talk about food. Food, fun, and oddities is part of the title. So yeah, I just didn't cover anything today. A lot of going to this little place in right outside of Waterville where they offer whoopie pies the size of your head. That got my attention. These are bigger than my head, as you can tell, but these are in Labadie's Bakery. They allowed me to watch them make whoopie pies. So, yeah, there's a lot of fun food stuff, and again, from South Maine up to Northern Maine, it's a huge difference in what is whimsy and what is food and what is fun. And every time I would stop at a yard sale or a restaurant up north, I would be talking to the people, and they'd ask me where I was, and we summer in the Belgrade area, and I would tell them then, they said, "Oh, you don't count. You're from the other Maine." So yeah, maybe I've got two Maines to write a book about from now on.
That would be the Canadian Maine.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for sticking with us well past our allotted time. So appreciate you joining us. So appreciate our speakers, our new trustees, our existing trustees, our advisory trustees, our staff, and our regular everyday members. So thanks for being here, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.